A very warm welcome to you all to the National Gallery for today's lunchtime talk, and also for those of you who watch on YouTube. My name's Christina Bradstreet. I'm the Courses and Events Programmer here at the National Gallery. And I have the delight, really, to talk about my #1 top National Gallery painting, which is Turner's Rain, Steam and Speed, the Great Western Railway of 1844. And I think what I really love about this painting so much is the sense of speed of this train powering through the landscape, thundering towards us. And I love the contrast between this solid black mass of the engine and the very ephemeral atmospherics, the sort of sense of scudding showers and this rather fragile sunlight that's just fleeting, flickering through the clouds in this storm, but actually in a very luminous way. And one way that I think that you might think about getting into this painting, which will work for some of you, and maybe not for others, but is to imagine poking your face through the canvas. Imagine. And imagining everything that would be coming at you. So imagining the wind rushing into your face, taking your breath away so you can barely breathe, barely speak. Imagine the rain lashing against your face, the cold, wet sliding down your face. Imagine the taste of the rain in your mouth, the grit perhaps of the coal, the soot getting into your eyes, and the taste of that. But also the sounds that would be around you. So the sounds of the screams of the gale, the storm, the thundering of the train on the tracks as it comes towards you, and even perhaps the sound of the whistle, which Waldo Emerson, the American transcendentalist, described as the voice of the 19th century saying, "Here I am." I love that quote. So you could imagine that, or you could imagine actually finding a place to be in the painting. And there's actually so many places that you can be in this painting. You could be a wind-tossed bird up in the clouds looking down on this scene. You could be a passenger on the train. And if you look very closely here, and you might need to come up to the painting later or zoom in on the National Gallery website, you'll be able to see the top hats of the figures here. There's no roof on this carriage. This is a third-class passenger train. And in fact, in 1844, the Railway Regulation Act, which Gladstone pushed through, and in the original bill, he asked for cheap train travel for workers commuting into the cities. So 1 penny travel, but also to have a roof protection over the heads of the third-class passenger trains. And this was sort of grudgingly taken up. Certainly these passengers do not have the roof over their head, and you can see their top hats there. So imagine yourself on the train with the wind and the rain lashing at you and this landscape sliding by in a blur. You could imagine being the hare on the track here. And you'll all say, what hare? This hare is a bit like a fairy in that you have to believe in order to be able to see it. And I believe. I can see its little white tip on the ear there, the white paw of the leg stretched out there, the hind leg there, and it's running for its life. It's man against nature here. And I've just been looking up, as you do, the top speed of a train and the top speed of a hare. And I think they're about the same, about 55 miles an hour in 1844. So it really is a race for life of man against nature here. For those of you who don't believe in the hare, even when you come in and look really closely, I should say it would have been much more obvious in 1844 than it is now. And we know this partly from the critical reviews in the press, but also because in 1856, I think, Sir Charles Eastlake, who was the director of the Royal Academy, where the painting was first shown, but also of the National Gallery, he asked the Conservation Department for the Royal Academy to top up the paint on the hair, because the paint that is put last onto a painting often sinks in, and this is maybe an afterthought by Turner. It's certainly one of the last things that he put onto the painting, so the paint had sunken in. So he asked for it to be topped up. Also, on the engravings that Turner approved of the painting, it's very clearly sort of delineated there, as is the puffs of steam, which have also sort of sunken in over time. So you could be the hair. You could be a passenger on the road bridge here. Actually, we don't really see any vehicles, but you could imagine yourself on the road bridge there. So remembering that before the railways, really the fastest you could go is the speed of a galloping horse, or as fast as you're likely to go. So perhaps on a horse and cart, trotting along gently on the road there. You could imagine being on the little rowing boat here. And I just want you to notice, and it will be hard for you to see from the back, but just to notice that they are headed in that direction, so the opposite way of the train. And that's also the case here. So you could imagine yourself here as the man in the field ploughing the field there. He's also going back in the opposite direction. So that might be significant. We'll come back to that. Or you can imagine being one of these classical maidens dressed in white there. And so this is a nod by Turner to the kind of painters that he really loved, like Poussin and Claude Lorraine, who put these classical figures into their landscapes. But might it also be a sort of nod to the new train spotters come out to wave at the train as it goes past, perhaps? So there are all these places that you can be in this painting, and I think that's kind of part of the point of this painting, that there isn't a single perspective. It's more of an experience, a vortex of experiences, of sensations, of being in this place at this time, with this train thundering through, and in a moment it will have passed. And yet, of course, there is a very strong line of perspective, this line of the railway coming through. And of course, Turner was professor of perspective at the Royal Academy schools. He taught artists how to do perspective from 1811 onwards. And I don't know about you, but I really do feel like the train is coming out of the painting at us. I have on guided tours spoken to, somebody once said to me that they felt that they could stop the train, they could sort of freeze it. But I think most people do feel that it is sort of coming at them. And I think that's really what Turner was going for. So it's coming at us. So I think there is something in this painting about time and about the idea of past and present and future. So the future is out here. The train hasn't got to us yet. The present is here, where the train is. And in fact, that's really the only bit of the train that's in really sharp focus, the chimney there, where you can see the light reflecting there. And then the past is back there. The past is gone. And if we think about it, how unusual is it to have at the center of the painting just nothingness, just a bit of cloud, bit of steam, nothing really. So this is incredibly innovative, a coup for Turner, I think. I have to share with you a story that was published in one of the critical reviews of the painting when the painting was shown at the Royal Academy in 1844. And of course, remember that in that period of the 19th century, the National Gallery and the Royal Academy shared its premises. So actually, the Royal Academy was here at Trafalgar Square. And the critics said, You need to come down to the Royal Academy and see this painting before the train hurtles out of the painting and away down Charing Cross. One of the things I think is really remarkable about this painting is that Turner is embracing this subject of modernity, of industrial revolution, of steam and power and change in this year, 1844, when he was 69 years old, so in his 70th year of life. Fairly good innings in the Victorian age, and yet he really is embracing and tackling this subject. But what is he saying to us? Is he celebrating change? Is he glorifying this engine? There's a nod here. And this sort of combat of the train against the forces of nature, but the train is powering through, unobstructed by this storm that's going around it. Or is he lamenting the loss of some past golden age with this sort of golden idyll of a landscape here? Somebody on a guided tour once said to me that they saw this sort of golden atmospherics as like a stage curtain that's kind of dropped down on the past here. Or is he saying something else? Is he saying maybe, like it or not, change is coming, be on the train, don't be left behind, don't be on the track like the hare, don't be in our kind of modern world, don't be the one who can't use email and doesn't know how to turn on their laptop and use social media. Is that what he's saying? And I can't give you a definitive answer to this, but I think that's the joy of this painting, the beauty of the painting, that Turner is inviting us to think about these things and to make up our own minds on when we stand on this. I like to think that this is Turner in old age, looking back, reflecting on his lifetime. So going back to this little boat here, well, we know that Turner spent a lot of time in his youth on and around the Thames Valley, and he did 12 oil sketches between 1806 and 1809, and from a rowing boat. And we know that he went out with his sketchbooks still exist, and with a parasol over his head to keep the shade off. And come and look closely, you'll see the parasol there. So I like to think that this is Turner reflecting on how the pace of life has really changed in his lifetime. And I like to think of him sort of sailing back into the past. Those days are gone. The days of the hand ploughman are gone. But of course, this is the period of great excitement about the railways. This is the period in the early Victorian period where the Victorians are buying up, investing in stocks and shares like crazy before the bust that's to come. So the first steam locomotive, I think, was 1806, and the first passenger trains are the early 1830s. Stephenson's rocket was 1829. So we're still in the early period of the railways, and by 1844 there's about just over 2,000 miles of railway in Britain. By 1848 there's 5,000 miles of railway, so you see it's really growing in that period. In 1844 there are about 30 million passengers using the railways. So there is this sort of great excitement about it. Now you can travel at speed across the country, also the passage of communications and goods, and the implications for industry that brings. But there's also a lot of anxiety about railways as well. So just like with the high-speed railways today, or the articles that we have in the press, the letters to the editor, you see that in the Victorian period. So the anxieties about what we would now call areas of outstanding natural beauty being carved up by this relentless growth of the railways. Also anxiety about the kind of calamities, the catastrophes and tragedies that happened on the railway. In 1841, 8 passengers died on the Great Western Railway when a train derailed, I think because of a collapsed siding. So there are other tragedies as well in this period. Just to say, actually, that the hare, sort of in superstition, if you see a hare running ahead of you, that is meant to foretell a great tragedy that's going to happen, some kind of calamity. So is Turner sort of predicting a broken axle, a boiler explosion, or even the collapse of Brunel's bridge, which I'll come back to in a bit. So anxiety about accidents, but also about what does it do to your body and mind to be traveling at 55 miles an hour. And that sounds kind of odd to us today, but what does it do to be on a train with your body rattled and with no fixed landscape, no fixed point of view, with the landscape sliding by in a blur? And what if you were a woman and you had been reading the latest Wilkie Collins sensation novel, the 50 Shades of Grey of the day that you'd picked up in paperback from the W.H. Smith stand at the railway station? What if you were reading that while being jolted along? What would that do to a woman's nerves and body? So there are all these kind of anxieties about women's mental health and the sort of idea of hysteria. So what is Turner saying? Well, what is his viewpoint? And I don't know, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can write your comments about what you think this painting meant to Turner and what it means to you as well. I'd really love to read those comments. I think that this painting is so innovative, partly because Turner is showing a train. That in itself is a coup in 1844. There really hadn't been that many paintings of trains, certainly not coming at you at speed. So sometimes you might see a small train sort of in the distance of a beautiful landscape, but just going along the horizon line. There are prints where we actually have this very similar perspective of the track coming out towards us. But those prints are so carefully delineated that they look static, the train looks static, rather than here where we have this very impressionistic effect. And of course I'm using the word impressionistic anachronistically because this is 1844 and the Impressionists are a phenomenon of the 1870s. When the painting is shown at the Royal Academy, it is a sensation, it is shocking, but in a very positive way. You know, you come down to the Royal Academy to see this painting. It is a very innovative painting, but at the same time, I think that there are ways that we could see this painting in a more traditional way, and I'll explain what I mean. So Turner comes to landscape painting very much in the tradition of his heroes, painters like Claude Lorraine and Poussin. Painters who, for them, landscape is really a backdrop for a classical mythological scene. And in fact, Turner paints a number of landscapes that have a classical mythological subject. Although for him, the landscape is becoming much more important and the classical mythology is sort of on the backdrop, it's kind of flipped. And this is very different from Constable. So I think we may sometimes think about Constable's paintings as being a bit chocolate boxy today, maybe because we've seen it on so many chocolate boxes and tea towels. But his paintings were so revolutionary because they were not backdrops for classical mythological scenes. Constable was painting the very ordinary lanes where he grew up in the villages around Dedham in Essex. Very ordinary scenes that wouldn't have been seen as worthy of painting before. And Turner's not like that. But we look at this painting and we might think, well, this isn't a classical mythological scene. This isn't a painting that just has landscape as a backdrop for a classical story. And of course, that's correct. But I think that we might start to think about this painting in a classical mythological way. And I say this because apparently this broad gauge train, it's a Firefly class of locomotive. And the Firefly class of locomotive have names like Cyclops and Achilles, but also Actaeon and Orion and Greyhound. And I think those three are particularly interesting to me. So Actaeon, think of Actaeon the hunter. Some of you may know our painting by Titian, our great painting of Diana and Actaeon. Diana is the goddess of the moon, but also of the hunt. And she's bathing in a glade with her nymphs. And Actaeon, the hunter, stumbles into her glade. And she is so furious that he has seen her naked that she turns him into a stag. And the stag is then ripped apart by his hounds, by his own hounds. So is this the hunter and the hunted? Perhaps. Interestingly, I think if the engines, the Firefly class of locomotives, have names that are classical, Actaeon's dogs have names that I think would make very good names for locomotives. So they have names like Tempest and Whirlwind. If we think about the name Orion, Orion is probably one of two constellations that I can easily recognize in the night sky. Orion was also a hunter. He was killed by Diana, who then turned him into the constellation. So in the night sky, Orion is forever chasing a hare, but he never catches up with it. So is there hope for our little hare here? I like to think so. Interestingly, Orion had three fathers. The god Neptune, so the god of water, Jupiter, the god of air, and Apollo, the god of fire. So we've got fire, air, and water. What does that make you think of? Well, it makes me think of the steam engine, where the fire heats the water that creates the steam. And this is rain, steam, and speed, after all. Fire, air, and water then also makes me think about another kind of traditional painting, the idea of the paintings of four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. So in the National Gallery, we have a series by Buchelaar, a Flemish painter, each showing earth, air, fire, and water in a sort of allegorical form. So again, that makes me think of the steam train here. And well, in the painting we have, we're awash with water here. The water of the River Thames, but also the rain. We've got earth of the ploughed field, the iron of the tracks. We have air, the storm that's around us, but also the steam as well. What haven't I mentioned? Earth, air, water, fire. We have the engine here at the front. So we've got this kind of red at the front of the engine. And if anyone here is really into their steam trains, you might say, well, you can't see into the firebox from the front of the train as it's coming towards you. And of course that's true, but I don't think that Turner cares about accurately depicting a train That's not what this is about. He wants to give you the sense of a train. What do you think of when you think of a train? Well, you think of fire, you think of steam, you think of speed, and that's what he's giving you. Apparently, with the Firefly class of locomotive, if it's really thrashing it, then the smoke box at the front of the train might just glow red at the edges. But if it was thrashing it, I don't think it would be giving off the steam in this way. You might correct me on that. But again, I don't think that Turner cares about that. I think he just really wants to give the sensation, this vortex of sensations of a train coming at you. So we might think about this as a kind of a four elements painting perhaps as well. So on one hand, it's a very innovative painting. On the other hand, it has its roots in classical painting. I'm not suggesting that we should think of this as Orion or of this kind of iron Actaeon thundering through the landscape, startling Diana and her nymphs there. I'm not suggesting that we necessarily read it quite as literally as that, but more that Turner is evoking these thoughts and these kind of layers of interpretation that might arise for a classically educated audience looking at this painting in 1844. So I think I'll close by just encouraging you to come and find the hair, see if you can find the hair, and do zoom into the website as well. And just to say what a fantastic painting this is, again, such an innovative painting in 1844. I do think about the audiences who came to the Lumiere brothers films at the turn of the 20th century with those early film footage of steam trains that seemed to be coming at the audience in the cinema, and how supposedly audiences rushed from their seats. And I wonder how people felt about this painting looking at this in 1844. I should just say something about Brunel and this bridge. I did say I'd come back to it. So this is the bridge at Maidenhead. If you've ever travelled from Paddington to Bristol, you'll have been over this bridge, although you wouldn't have seen it. You can't really see it from the train. And the bridge was so exciting. It was 5 years old in 1844. But when it was built, it was such a sensation because it spanned the River Thames in the fewest number of spans for the period. And the story goes that the powers that be who had commissioned the bridge got nervous about it once it was built. So they asked Brunel to leave the wooden infrastructure up. You can imagine how annoying that must have been for him. But he agreed to it reluctantly. And then in 1839 there was a storm. The bridge, the wooden structure fell down, and they went back to him and said, "Is it safe for the trains to pass?" And he said, "Well, actually, they have been all along, because you left a little gap between the wood and the metal structure." So just a final thought, that I mentioned the word impressionistic before, and when Pissarro and Turner came to the National Gallery in 1870 or 1871, this is a painting that really drew their attention, and I'm sure it was an inspiration for them. Thank you very much.